All right. Welcome everyone to the Time to Rebuild event. I am so glad that you all are here. My name is Tori Collier. I am the Communications Liaison for the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in the Children, Youth, and Family Services Division. And helping me out today is the co sponsor of this event. His name is Jeff Talent. He's the executive director of the Evolution Foundation. So, welcome, Jeff. Jeff will be helping me to monitor the chat. Feel free to ask questions in the chat all throughout the session today. We want this to be a very, very interactive event. So any comments or questions, we want you to definitely use the chat. A few housekeeping items. This event is being recorded. And so I ask that you mute your mics until we get to the Q&A session to avoid any background noise, but please feel free to keep your camera on. And as I said, use the chat and the emoji reaction icons. As I said, we just want this event to be as interactive as possible. So we're going to have a fantastic conversation today, and we're so glad that you all are here. So I guess we'll just get started. So today we're joined by Dr. Joey Clifton. He's the man of the hour, the person we've all come to see and hear from. He's the author of A Time to Rebuild. Joey has over 35 years of experience working for nonprofit organizations. He holds a doctorate degree in education. He has served as adjunct faculty for both public and private education institutions. He's a published writer of curriculum and articles and books, and he currently works for the Evolution Foundation, where he helps build community coalitions, trains personnel, and facilitates strategic planning efforts for communities and state-run organizations dealing with children's behavioral health. Joey is the father of 2 adopted children who have dealt with mental health and substance abuse challenges. So welcome, Joey Clifton. Also here to contribute to our conversation is Doug Ishmael, who has made himself available to speak on behalf of Adverse Childhood Experiences on Oklahoma families and to share his wealth of knowledge and experience from his 24-year career in working with families and serving in the Oklahoma child welfare system. Doug currently works as a child welfare consultant for the Evolution Foundation under the great direction of Executive Director Jeff Talent. There, Doug helps children and their families, foster families, and child welfare staff, working as a liaison between child welfare, mental health, and behavioral health professionals in Oklahoma communities. Doug has 2 adult children, 2 daughter-in-laws, and 3 grandsons. So, Doug, thank you for being with us. And Joey, thank you so much for being with us and for creating such a fantastic book. And we want to start off, I want to start off by just taking a few moments to read some of the reviews that have already been posted about Joey's book, A Time to Rebuild, to get us started. So one reader wrote, I read the majority of this book all in one evening. It's realistic. It's an excellent read that you will not forget. I enjoyed it immensely, and I will be sharing it with others. Another person wrote, oh, how I wish I'd read this earlier in my teaching career, how it might have helped me to better understand my students. Thank you for bringing your professional passion to this book that has the potential to impact generations. And one other person that I captured wrote, wow, I don't consider myself to be an avid reader, but I just could not put this book down. Each character was so personally relatable. I came away with a sense of knowing them and feeling their pain. Thank you, Joey. So I want to open it up to the audience and ask you all, what did you think about the book? And how did the book, A Time to Rebuild, impact you? So feel free to unmute your mics because we want this just to be a conversation. So we'd love to hear from you. Any feedback you have.
This is assuming they've read it. So,
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
we may need to find out. Have you guys had the opportunity to read it? Edie and Marcus, have you had the opportunity to read it? Edie's shaking her head, yes.
I did. I
Okay.
actually I actually read it on the plane going to Miami a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and I read it. I mean, there was a 2 hour flight, and I read it most the majority of it on the way down there. So it was a good read.
Good. Thanks.
Wow.
I have not read it. I didn't even know you wrote a book, Joey. I had no
All
idea.
right. So you're just sort of a newbie to this. I'll have to kind of explain a little more to you in
Yeah.
terms of what's going on. All right. All right.
Yes, and that's the
Hopefully,
thing.
hopefully it'll help you want to read it then, Marcus, and we get done here. All right.
Absolutely. That brings us perfect because that's what I was going to do next. Is I was going to ask Joey to refresh us all and to give us a brief overview refresher of the book for everyone who joined today.
All right. It'll be brief because we have other things to get to, but I want to remind us all what it's about because it may have been a while since you read it, and Marcus hadn't read it all. So it's a story of a family, 3 generations of a family, a father by the name of Titus, a daughter by the name of Angel, and her daughter, Titus's granddaughter by the name of Maddie. They each have their own problems, their own issues, their own ACEs and trauma that they've been dealing with throughout their lives. But it kind of all comes to a head when the daughter, Angel, first is arrested for drugs, and then she overdoses. And so Maddie has to go and live with her grandfather and gets involved in the child welfare system and all those kinds of things that go with that. And in the process of the book, in the process of all of this activity going on, Titus begins to reflect on his own history. He begins to reflect on Maddie's history and Angel's history, and begins to understand. In fact, he learns about ACEs during the book and begins to understand what's going on in his life. And he's just kind of working through this book and trying to figure out how to deal with it and what to do with it. A lot of problems arise, a lot of issues arise as he tries to deal with. And in the end, I hope there's a little bit of hope. That there's the family has hope toward the end, that there is possibility to get through the struggle, the trauma, and the difficulties of life. And that's where I wanted it to go. Now, for you, Marcus, that's very vague, but that kind of gives you some idea about the context of the book anyway. That's enough for now, I think.
Yes, thank you, Joey. That's awesome. So we'll dive into some questions, but I just want to remind you all that you all are free to jump in at any time, comment, interject your questions so that this will be a conversation. And we hope that these questions will just spark things that you may have wondered about or thought about. So just feel free to jump in. So my first question to Joey is, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, was a very important focus and anchor in the book. So tell us, what are ACEs and who exposed you to this research? And did you consult with anyone in particular about this for your book?
I learned about ACEs right after I started working with Evolution Foundation. 15 years ago, Jeff, whatever it was, 15, 16, I could lose track. 16, you got, all right. We had several years ago, OICA, Oklahoma Institute of Child Advocacy, had a yearly annual meeting. And during one of those meetings, they brought somebody in to talk about ACEs. This was early on in my work career with Evolution Foundation. So I learned about it at that particular point. But as I learned about it, I thought, well, this is really interesting, but it doesn't apply to me because I didn't grow up in that kind of a house. I didn't grow up in that kind of home, and they explained that ACEs has to do with these adverse childhood experiences that the kids have when growing up in families, dysfunctional families, particularly, whether it be emotional abuse or physical abuse or divorce or substance abuse in the home, or all those kinds of things. And so I said, this doesn't apply to me too much, and doesn't apply to my family, even though my kids were having trouble at that time. I thought, this is not going on in my family. And so my kids' misbehavior has nothing to do with this ACEs stuff either. And so I didn't think too much more about it until, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. It began to become much more talked about here in Oklahoma. A lot more training going on, a lot more stuff going on. And as I began to go through those trainings, and I began to understand that Yeah, it does apply to me. It does apply to the people that I work with, and it applies to my own kids in its own way. And so I began then to begin to sort of see the world through that ACEs lens. I didn't really consult anybody because I've been through so many of these trainings over the last few years that kind of give me some idea about what it's about. It's more of a lens that I see the world through now, which made it fairly easy for me to write about it.
Very cool. Very cool. So oh yeah, go ahead, Doug.
I just want to jump in right there and based on the ACEs and what Joey just said, and kind of go back to one of the reviews you read where somebody said that they wish they had read that book early on in their career. Well, I can say the same thing. I worked 29 years for the state of Oklahoma, and a little more of that was with the Department of Human Services, but the other half was with corrections. And you know, in that time, I began my career with corrections, and I saw young men, really just boys. I mean, I actually saw a 13-year-old boy in a men's prison. He had been convicted of so many youthful crimes that they went ahead and adjudicated him as an adult on his last crime. And then when I came to the Department of Human Services and started working child welfare, I got to seeing so many youth going through the foster care system. And one of the things that would aggravate me the most, especially early on in my child welfare history, was we had great foster homes out there. I mean, just awesome people take kids that they don't know into their homes, and it would aggravate me so much to go and place these kids in these beautiful homes, and then get a call a few days later. You're going to have to come get these kids. They've tore up our house. They're cussing us out. They're beating the neighbor's dogs. And you know, this didn't always happen between 8 and 5. You know, it's usually 10 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning or something. And it used to just aggravate me to death. I just wanted to wring those kids' necks, you know. But when I finally found out, like Joey, when I finally started hearing and learning about ACEs and the effects that trauma has on children, it really rang a bell with me. And I wished I had read that book and knew more about ACEs. When I first became a child welfare worker, it would have made me a much better worker. So whoever wrote that review was spot on when they said that they wish they had read it early on in their career.
Yeah, and I think that reviewer was a teacher, if I remember right. So school teachers, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. That was great. Thank you, Doug. My next question for you, Joey, was in the book, after Titus had learned a little bit about ACEs, it seemed very hard for Titus to process what he was learning. Can you take us back to that moment where he was in that support group and give us insight to what was going on with Titus? He seemed very physically and emotionally overwhelmed at the time of his first learning about ACEs.
Yeah, that was a little bit of difficult scene for me to write because, you know, when I first learned about ACEs, I didn't have that reaction because I had not lived those kinds of things. But I think that there are a lot of people, and the more I've been involved with this and learning about it, and more interaction I have with people, and I'm learning that there are a lot of people who have high ACEs scores, and they don't understand why they think the way they think or behave the way they think. And then when they learn about ACEs, there's like this aha moment, this light bulb comes on, and they think, no wonder I'm the way I am. No wonder I've got these issues. No wonder I've having difficulty with these relationships. No wonder, I explode in anger and don't know where it comes from. And, and all of a sudden this light bulb comes on. And I wanted when I was writing that scene, I wanted that to be the case for Titus. I wanted him to have this aha moment, like, this applies to me. This applies to my daughter. This applies to my granddaughter, and all that kind of stuff. But I also wanted in that scene and the following scenes there to show that how negative this understanding of ACEs can be for some people. Oftentimes we focus only on these adverse childhood experiences and how negatively they affect us. And we never get around to talking about the hope. When Titus, the next, few scenes or whatever, he's thinking, my granddaughter is doomed. My daughter is doomed. I'm doomed. I can't change, because of the way, because of all the stuff that's happened to me in my life. I did a training about year and a half ago or so for one of the coalitions on ACEs. And after the training was over, one of the participants came up to me and he said, I appreciate you, doing this. And I've sat through lots and lots of these ACEs trainings. And he said, but I always found them extremely depressing. And he said, yours is the first one where I learned that there's a way through this. And I think just now, and particularly in Oklahoma, we're beginning to talk more about these protective factors and the possibility of hope and how you get from that trauma to that hope. And that's what I wanted to kind of show in the book. But first of all, Titus had to come to this very depressing point where he realizes that I'm messed up. My dad messed me up, my family messed me up, and my daughter's messed up, and my granddaughter's messed up. And how do I, what do we do? And so, learning to find a way through it is the hard part sometimes. Sometimes learning about ACEs is the easy part. It's learning to find the way through it and finding the help to get through it that seems to be the hardest part sometimes. And so I wanted in the book to show that there is possibility for hope as long as you got people walking along beside you, as long as you got people supporting you, and those kinds of things that I hope to bring out in the book. Anyway, that's kind of what I was hoping to accomplish in that particular scene.
Good. I was gonna ask you, how did understanding ACEs impact you personally, as far as when you were dealing with your own children and you learned about ACEs? Did it help you to change or?
Most of you guys know. I mean, and a couple, Edie probably doesn't know, obviously, and Marcus, I don't know about but the others know that I've got 2 adopted kids who are now in their 30s, and when we got them, we had this great hope that things were going to be wonderful for them and things were going to be great and they were going to grow up to be great kids and all that kind of stuff. But it didn't really turn out that way for us. They both experienced a great deal of trauma. In different ways, and I can talk about that at some point if we need to, but not so much that what Jenny and I brought to them, but other things in their lives. One is that they were adopted, for one thing. Adoption is it's a huge trauma for a lot of kids. It was for my kids, having somebody reject them and say, we don't want you, and that kind of stuff, and they live with that. The other thing had to do with just who they were as kids. They were bullied a lot in school, that kind of thing, both physically and emotionally bullied a great deal. And so they had a lot of trauma. One of them had learning disabilities, constantly felt like a failure. I think my wife and I are convinced that at least one of our kids was a drug baby. We don't really have proof of that, but we think that's probably the case. And so a lot of trauma even before he was born in terms of things going on in his life. So, they have dealt with a lot of that kind of stuff. And my wife and I, we had no idea what to do with them as they were growing. They did not respond to all the books we read and all the things they said to do. They just did not respond like they were supposed to. And so we kept thinking, well, what's wrong with us as parents? And, and you begin to doubt yourself as parents. You begin to feel badly that you're a bad parent, all those kinds of things. One of my kids used to put his fist through the wall and his head through the doors when he would get upset. He was a cutter, cut on furniture, cut on himself. Another one of my kids was just hard-headed as he could be. If you told him to do something, he'd do the exact opposite. And he was a runner, kind of like, both of those you can see in Maddie. She becomes a cutter and she becomes a runner. And those were my kids, and how they responded to some of the stuff going on in their life. Both my kids ended up turning to alcohol and drugs and, that kind of stuff. My wife and I did a lot of things wrong, just because we didn't know, we were ignorant. and how to handle kids like that and what to do with them. But every parent makes mistakes. And then when I learned, and so I didn't learn about ACEs until they were much older, late teens, early 20s, before I really learned about ACEs. And even later than that, mid 20s, by the time I really began to understand how all the trauma of their lives had affected them. So it didn't affect how I dealt with them as kids, but I think it's affected how I deal with them now as adults. They both still live with me and my wife. And so I hope that I give them more grace, that I give them more understanding, more forgiveness than I used to give them, that I kind of walk along beside them, just allow them to be who they are, not try to change them, but try to give them the support when they ask for support. And I think it's changed me and my wife. I think it's changed our relationship. Our relationships are better with them now, even though it's still strained at times, but they're still better because I understand now a little bit better about some of the things that they've gone through and what they're dealing with. So I think it's a life changer for parents as they learn what ACEs is about and how it affects their kids.
That's good, Joey. I was skip around because what you're talking about is so relevant. Because I wonder, looking back, I heard you talking about that disconnect between I that doesn't apply to me or my family, but and with addition to what you said, like you weren't exposed to ACEs when your kids were little. But my question was about Titus, in that it took him a long time seemingly to reach out for help. And he was extremely reluctant to involve DHS, especially when he learned about the abuse involving Derek and his granddaughter. And so I wondered if you could give us some more insight as to why it was so hard for Titus to reach out for help.
And I don't know that I've got an answer for that, really, Tori. My wife and I reached out for help fairly immediately when our kids began to have problems, but a lot of families don't. And I mean, I can only speculate. And so I wrote this because I knew a lot of families don't. And so I wrote this as such. And so, maybe you guys can help a little bit there. I mean, what do you think? Why do people not seek help when they're having so many trouble, like so much problem, like my family did? I'll let you all answer that one.
I think it's because and I've been in the same situation myself, so I can speak for myself. It's because I didn't want to admit that I couldn't handle it. I didn't want to admit that I needed help from anybody else. And I sure wasn't going to let somebody come in and take a look at my weakness.
Right.
That was for sure. So I think there's a lot of that.
I think you're right. I agree. I think we grow up in these families where we keep it, everything is closed, and you keep it in the family, and you don't let anybody else know about your problems and your issues and your struggles, and because it makes you look weak, Jeff. The other thing that came to my mind was that it may be that there's a trust issue here. In the story, I allude to the fact that when Titus's mom finally leaves her husband, they go and live with her aunt, or his aunt. And so it's sort of a family. Let's keep it in the family. That's where they seek to help. A lot of us kind of go to family if we can. We're looking for help, but we don't want to go outside the family, particularly to government agencies, or, because we don't trust them. There's this trust thing. They might take my kids away. They might, whatever. So we kind of keep it closed as much as we can. I don't know. It's hard for people.
I agree. Doug, what do you think? You spent a lot of time with families, and they're giving you any insight over the years?
Well, I agree with both what Joey and Jeff said, that as the man of the house, if you will, I was kind of taught by my father that it was my responsibility to build a wholesome household and raise my boys to be hardworking young men and law-abiding citizens and everything. And so we take on this role that that it's our responsibility to do that. And I could not be more wrong, because women are actually probably have more influence on their kids than men do. But not wanting to admit that there's anything wrong going on in your home. And of course, I'm just personally, I'm a fix it kind of guy. I want to fix everything. And even when I don't know how to fix it, I still want to fix it. Today I'll Google it. So I'll Google everything. But back then we didn't have how to Google to raise your children. So, but that's I agree. It's just that stubbornness in us. It's not wanting to admit that there's any problems in your home. Those are probably the two biggest things.
Thank you, Doug. I was going to, speaking of human service agencies, I was going to segue us to the highlights of how Joey wrote DHS services in the book. And I noticed that you painted them very positively. There's pluses and negatives, with families and how they perceive, human service agencies. And so I want to ask you, who did you consult with to make sure that DHS was represented in such a realistic way? And how important to you was it, or why was it important for you to show DHS in a positive light?
Yeah, I did. When I was had my boys were smaller or whatever, I had no clue about. I practically knew nothing about DHS, and I didn't really start learning about DHS until I started working with Evolution Foundation and began to interact with child welfare workers and other DHS workers. And one of the things I found about those DHS workers that I interact with in all the coalitions across the state is that they are some of the most loving, caring, concerned group of folks. I mean, they do what they do, a hard job. And they do what they do because they care deeply about families and deeply about kids. And there's no doubt in my mind that the vast majority of them are like that. We hear the isolated incident where something goes wrong, and that's what gets blown out of proportion. But the majority of those workers are just caring, loving kind of folks, and I wanted that to come through to some degree in what in what was in there. I didn't want a negative perspective of child welfare workers at all. But it also understood that even though I had some vague understanding of the child welfare process, I didn't understand all the ins and outs of it. I didn't know, what each of the characters or each of the roles are, and who does what, and all those kinds of things. And so I had to turn to my good friend Doug Ishmael to give me that insight and his wisdom and his understanding. So we had several conversations, I think a Zoom conversation, cell phone conversations about some of this stuff. And he kind of got me straight about some things and told me, all the different roles and got all those kinds of things. So I really do appreciate you, Doug, and what you did for that. It's extremely important for the book. But with that said, and if you read the acknowledgments in the back of the book, you notice that I give Doug credit, but I say any mistakes in there about child welfare are my mistakes and not Doug's.
Oh.
I did have to take a few liberties here and there and shift things a little bit, but I think I kept it pretty close to what it was supposed to be. So just so you know, it's not Doug's fault. Anything's wrong.
See, Joey, I thought you was going the other way with that. I thought you was going to say, if there's anything wrong, it's this guy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
No, I just want to say that I was very flattered to have the opportunity to give you any input on it. It was I retired as a district director for child welfare services, and I like to think that I had a lot of experience and I saw just about everything, unfortunately, that you can see that happens in child welfare. And it's not always, it's very seldom a pleasant experience. When you see kids go home, it's a pleasant experience. When you see parents make changes in their lives, it's a pleasant experience. But for the most part, it's a whole lot of fighting with parents trying to get them to understand why they need to do the right thing. It's a whole lot of chasing kids around that are running or cutting or tearing up a home. It's a whole lot of fighting with attorneys and judges, and it's just it is the most difficult job I've ever done. And I've done a lot of different things, from construction, climbing poles, working in corrections. And I can honestly say that it was the most difficult job I ever did, but it was also the most rewarding job that I ever did. And so to get to be able to read Joey's novel, I was amazed at how spot on he really was. I didn't make many change. I mean, I didn't make many recommendations, and and to see how he didn't write a story and show DHS in a bad light. Uh, I I might have recommended that he show something good, but he had already done that, and it just really pleased my heart because I used to before I retired, I would always tell staff and workers that, hey, hold your head up. You're not going to get a lot of attaboys in this job. People aren't going to come around patting you on the back, telling you you've done a good job. At least I expect the supervisors to do that, and I like to do that to them, but everybody else, they're not going to be doing that. And so I said, but the thing is, when you lay your head down at night, you should be able to sleep and rest knowing that you did good out there today. You saved some children, or you changed some lives for the better. Now, just like Joey said, it's an agency just like any other agency. We do our best to hire good people, but sometimes you hire somebody that just doesn't fit the job. And like you said, there are times that those few uh, will shed a bad light on the agency, but I can promise you, there's many, many, many more good people out there that are true social workers, doing that job and doing good work every day. And it just thrilled me to see that you showed that, and how that I've drawn a loss. What was the child welfare worker's name?
Letitia.
Yeah.
Letitia.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Letitia shared, her knowledge and her wisdom. It was just awesome. I really appreciate you doing that.
I was going to comment on that, Joey, too. It wasn't even in one of my questions, but I just had to say you took your time with that character and made sure that we knew in our minds kind of what she looked like, what her diction words were like, how she moved through space, how much space she took up, how she walked. And I wonder, like, were you pulling that, from, some different groups of people that maybe you met over the course of, just being in the field? I mean, you seem to really take your time with making her come to life. And so I just wondered kind of what the influence.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed creating Letitia. I mean, she was a character. I wanted a character. I wanted somebody memorable, and so I did take a little bit extra time with her, probably a little more than some of the others. But I could picture her in my mind. But it was sort of a combination of a lot of people and a lot of different experience, little interactions I've had with people. But I could kind of picture her in my mind. Even I could probably picture her better than I could picture Joe or picture some of the other characters in there. And So yeah, it was easy for me to kind of talk about her, and I enjoyed those scenes with her.
Awesome. That was great. Well, I want to segue back to Titus, because we were talking about, ACEs and how it impacted him. And we're starting to kind of unfold when we were talking about his first learning about ACEs and what that was. And then I wrote about how he seemed to start doing a lot of that self-reflection, like about his own ACEs. And to me, when I was reading the book, that seemed to be kind of the starting point or the start to change, and how it impacted the way he started to relate to his granddaughter and his daughter, and even his openness to Joe. And so I just want to know, did you agree that self-reflection was the turning point for Titus, or the antecedent for change, or would you say it was a different incident that really started?
No, I think that yeah, self-reflection is. I think you're right, Tori. It's absolutely necessary for us in order to make change in our life. Self-reflection is in sort of in effect the whole novel is about this self-reflection of Titus on and off through the story as he reflects on his own life and his daughter's life and his granddaughter's life, and those kinds of things. I don't think change happens until we do some self-reflection, but the issue is that most of us just kind of cruise through life. We don't do a lot of self-reflection. We know we got problems. We don't think about where they're coming from. We just know we just kind of deal with them, and we just we don't really do a lot of self-reflection until something significant happens in our life, some event, some traumatic event in itself that makes us stop and say, oh, wait, whoa. And for Titus, it was when Maddie came to live with him, and he wasn't something that disrupted his life, disrupted his routine, made him have to focus on his relationship with Angel and all those kinds of things. So oftentimes, I think self-reflection doesn't happen until some event. We want people to change, and we can tell them about ACEs and we can do all that kind of stuff, but sometimes they're not ready to make that change until these events happen in their life to make them really start to reflect on who they've been and all those kinds of things. So I think it's sort of a combination of those things, that self-reflection, but it is the antecedent to that is this some disruptive event in life that seems to cause it sometimes.
Yeah. I want to take you back to when you were talking about your kids and just disappointment about how you're not acting like you should. I'm pouring this love and water on you, and then take you back to the book, how Titus early in about chapter 23 is reflecting on his dreams and his life and his family growing up and his dreams that he had as a young man and how those didn't happen. And then later in the book, just about, when you were talking about how when children don't act the way you think they should, it makes you feel like you failed. And then with Titus in chapter 41, when Maddie runs away and then she's found again, and Titus admits to his daughter Angel that he's failed as a parent. And then Angel admits to her father that she feels like she's failed as well. And so how you kind of talked about it a little bit, but do you feel like that was your story? Is that how you felt? And if so, how does a person, a parent or caregiver who perceives they failed get beyond that to get to hope?
Well, it's a lot in that question, Tori. We'll
Loaded.
we'll see what we can do. All right. Loaded question. That's right. A lot of stuff there. All right. That chapter 23 is that scene where he picks up the phone and calls Letitia and says, I can't do it anymore. Come get her. And he's reflecting on, all the ACEs, he's reflecting on all the bad behavior of Maddie and all those kinds of things. And there are times in my life with my kids growing up when I wish I could have picked up the phone and said, come get them, take them away. I can't do it anymore. I didn't have anybody to call, we had adopted them. They were ours. And but I wish that there were sometimes, those kinds of that opportunity. When you get kids, whether adopted or you give birth to kids or whatever, you have these dreams for them. You envision them growing up to be healthy, well-adjusted kids. They're going to have great friends in school. They're going to do well in school. They're going to be a good athlete, or they're going to, whatever in school. They're going to go on to college. They're going to get a career. They're going to have a family. They're going to have kids. They're going to all come home on Christmas and, Easter, and you're going to have wonderful times together. And isn't that going to be wonderful? That was not my family. When I got my kids, that was the dream. That was the vision for our family and our future. That did not turn out to be the case, at all. Our kids ended up getting arrested, getting drugs, getting all kinds of stuff like that. When friends over the years, we'd have these conversations and they'd say, oh yeah, my daughter's graduating from college next year. And I could say, yeah, mine's getting out of prison next year, or, I had a friend actually email me this week, an old friend from 40 years ago. She'd picked up my book and she'd read it. And so she had sent me this email about it. And then she sort of updated me on her kids and said, oh yeah, by the way, my youngest son, he's a pastor now of one of the 10 largest growing churches in the nation, or the fastest growing churches in the nation. That's great, Linda. Sure, I'm glad those things are going for you. But then I didn't say to her, but I could have said to her, well, today I'm taking my son to his probation officer to see if he can get his ankle monitor off. That's the kind of, the dreams didn't come true for us. And so I wanted to reflect that in the story because there are so many families who live with these lost dreams, you know, and for in a lot of ways, these dreams are they're false dreams. I don't know that there's any perfect family by any means. You know, there's the Leave It to Beaver kind of family. Some of y'all are too young for that. You know, there are two. Most families are not like that. But when you have kids like ours with all these kinds of issues and all these kinds of problems and all this kind of stuff going on in their lives, you're just not going to have that kind of life. And so my wife and I have had to, over the years, deal with that loss, the loss of a dream. And it's almost like a family member dying, but just won't die. I mean, they're just on their deathbed and they just keep, you know, and it goes on and on and on and on. And so you grieve on and on and on this loss that you anticipated for your family and for yourself and for your kids. And so that's, you know, I wanted that to kind of come through the story and through what Titus was feeling. Obviously, those parts were some of my thoughts and my things through the years as I've reflected on my kids. Okay, I've talked about loss and dreams and things like that. I can't. What else was in the question, Tori? I don't remember what else.
Yeah, I wanted to know, you know, how do you transition to hope?
Well, yeah, that's
how important is hope?
You know, that's a. I think it's absolutely essential to move forward. You got to have the hope. And I think part of it is just coming to terms with the loss in general and accepting that, you know, that loss happens, dreams fail, and it doesn't mean that you have failed. Just the dreams have failed. I had a conversation with one of my boys a few years ago. We were talking about our relationship, you know, and he was an adult by then, but we were talking about it. And he said to me at that time, Dad, said, you and Mom have been great parents to me. Said, I have been a lousy son. I have done all kinds of things wrong. I've messed up, but it's all on me, he said. It's not on you. You know, you are not at fault for everything that goes on in my life. And I think as parents, sometimes we carry that burden if it's our fault because we didn't raise them right or didn't whatever. So when he said that to me, it was just sort of this freeing kind of thing that I think to move on, you've got to forgive yourself. You've got to understand that it's not always all your fault. And then if it is your fault, there is possibility for redemption. There is possibility for renewal. There is possibility to rebuild that relationship. But you're never going to have the kind of family that you had once dreamed. So you have to dream for new possibilities and new relationships and new normals, whatever that normal, you know, happens to be. And with that, there comes hope with those new dreams, I think, whatever they may be.
That's good. That's good. Well, I want to ask you something about your character development some more. In the book, you had two perspectives of Titus and Maddie, and you want to know, how did you pick those two?
But Titus was easy because Titus was he was me for the most part. I mean, everything about Titus is not me. He's a lot better in some things than I am, but his thoughts, his things he likes, and you know, those kinds of things. So he was easy for me to get into the head of Titus. I knew though that I couldn't tell a whole story from one perspective because Titus was not in every scene, like when she's in school and you know, those kinds of things. And so I had to have another character, another voice. And Maddie was the obvious one there in terms of that. Maddie was harder for me to get into her head. Trying to get into the head of an 11-year-old girl with ACEs, you know, I haven't experienced those things. I didn't, I've experienced. I kind of thought back on my elementary school years and how traumatic that was just in and of itself at times, you know. But it was. I had to struggle to get Maddie's voice there, and I'm hoping I got it close. I feel like there's probably places I could have done better with that. I thought about writing a few scenes with angels from Angel's perspective, but honestly, I could not get into Angel's head. She is very much like my boys in a lot of ways. She responds, she cusses, she gets angry easily and flares out. She, all these kinds of things that my boys do at times. But for the life of me, after living with them for all these years, I still don't know why. I know that they've got trauma, different kinds of things going on in their lives, but I cannot think the way they think. And it was too hard for me to get into Maddie's head, to write a scene from her perspective. So I left her out in terms of that. Went the easy way.
Well, I can tell you from the experience, my child welfare experience, that you nailed her pretty good, because I don't know how many times I saw girls her age. They would come into the office and, it was one of these right here, and they weren't going to talk to you. They weren't going to talk to anybody. The most mama figures we had in the office would go down there and try to talk to them. They wouldn't talk to them. And, when they got mad, they would run, they would hide, they would cut, they would do all those things. Everything that you even though you had a rough time getting in her head, you did a pretty good job of it, because it was very believable when I read it. It was just like remembering back a lot of stories that I could have shared about child welfare.
Yeah. Well, I watched my kids watched them do all those things, but actually getting into the head of somebody and sharing what they're thinking is much more difficult than actually showing what they were doing. That's a whole two different things, really. So I hear you though. Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested about Angel's perspective. As far as like what she was, you gave some insight on what may have contributed to her behavior, but man, what is going on in that head?
A lot of, when you're writing a novel, there's a couple of different things you got to do. Is one is when you get in the head of them, you got to tell what they're thinking and how they're processing, all those kinds of things. But you also do a lot of showing, and so so the things that I showed Angel doing or Maddie doing or whatever it speaks a lot about their character and who they are and what they think, and just by looking at their reactions and responses and those kinds of things. So I hope I was able to get some of that in there.
Oh, Joey, that was with Angel. I still just remember like that. I was trying to imagine like kind of a beat up car and her slamming the door and giving the bird as she's walking away. I'm like, wow, it made me feel, it was hard for me to empathize sometimes,
Yeah.
With her. But yeah, excellent job on that. And we're getting close to time, but I will just go ahead and throw in asking, why you did choose to make all the characters women, and why not a son and a grandson.
Yeah, I think obviously Maddie and Angel are they're reflections of my own kids, and I didn't. If I had made them both male, they would have been too closely identified with my boys, and I think I would have had more difficulty actually writing it because I would have made those characters my boys completely, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want people reading it and said, "Oh, that's Aaron. Oh, that's Matthew." And they can kind of read into it a little bit now, but if they were their boys, they would say, "Yeah, that's Aaron or that's Matthew or whatever." And I didn't want to do that to my kids. They got enough trauma. Having the whole world read about their lives. So yeah. And then the other thing about, I think, making them women, I think is that honestly, women are the ones who are going to be reading this book more than men. Women just tend to be more readers, and particularly this kind of novel. And so they would identify, I thought, more with some of the women in the story. So
very good. Well, I'll make this one of my last questions, unless someone in the audience has another they want to throw out. But I was just curious that the start of the book is the death of Titus's wife. She's the catalyst of the whole story, her death. starts him on the journey of self-discovery. How different do you think your book would have been if Titus's wife did not die?
I think the book would have been completely different. It would have been a different story, because if she hadn't died when Angel went to jail, who would she have called? She would have called Linda, her mother. Linda probably would have bailed her out. When Maddie came into the home, who would have taken care of Maddie? It would have been Linda, not Titus. And Titus wouldn't have had to deal with all that stuff because Linda was going to take care of all that stuff. I think the story would have been, instead of about the trauma of the kids and of Maddie and all that, the story would have ended up being the broken relationship between Titus and Linda, the strain on their marriage, and and having a child in their home, now raising a granddaughter, and it would have been a different story. My wife and I have been married for 43 years.
I don't think there would have been a story.
No. My wife and I have been married for
There wouldn't have been a story.
years, and we have had tremendous stress in our marriage over the years because of the boys, and the struggle and trying to figure out what to do and how to do. We disagreed on things, and there's conflict there, and there might have been a story there of some kind, but it wouldn't have been nearly as good. So yeah, I had to get rid of Linda. I had to make sure there was no one else for Maddie to go to. I mean, for Angel to go to. Had to go to Titus. Had to be that event in his life so that he can begin to process what's going on. So had to kill her off. And my wife told me when when she read the book, she said, "You killed me off right from the very beginning." It's like, so she said. In fact, she said that. She said, "Actually, this book is about your worst nightmare, that I die and you end up raising our granddaughter." And in a way, that's true. Novelists kind of do this what if, and that has gone through my mind. What would happen if I raised my granddaughter, which may be a possibility someday, who knows? And my wife dies, I'll be left with her. What would I do? And that was one of the what ifs when I was beginning to think about this story and where it would go and that kind of thing. So.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you so much for writing such a fantastic book. I want to thank you, Doug, and you, Jeff, for being with us on the call. And I just want to remind everyone who may be watching this back for playback that Joey Clifton will be having a session at the Children's Conference that will be happening May the 21st. And we'll be sending out a pre-registration flyer for his session. And we would like for all of you to spread the word about his session. And the courtesy of Evolution Foundation, we will be giving away 50 autographed signed books of A Time to Rebuild for the first 50 people who pre-register for that session. So be on the lookout for that flyer. With the playback, I will send a link to register for the conference as well. And so I just want to thank you again for joining us. It was a fabulous event, and we just look forward to doing another edition of this in May. Thank you.